Hey guys, this is Scott with Mojo Painting, and today we're working on the Outcast from Darklight, Momento, Mori. Just like in my last video, I started out by cleaning up the model and doing some zenithal priming to help pick out the details and make it easier to see what needs painting as I went along. So with that introduction and brief overview of what's happened so far, let's jump in and get started. Okay, so firstly, I started off with coating the skin with a layer of Bugman's Glow. Now, I prefer to knock the skin out first on most models, simply because it's usually the layer that's the hardest to reach later on without issues. But another general rule of thumb is to always go with the layer that's going to be the hardest to reach first, and work your way towards the easier ones. Okay, so after we got a few layers of the Bugman's Glow down, next up I did a lighter layer of Cadian Fleshtone and pretty much coated the whole thing while avoiding the areas in the deepest recesses. Again, this is in very thin coats that is maybe 1-to-1, maybe a little bit more water than paint, and just to keep the layers thin so they blend better together. At this point I wasn't overly thrilled with how it was looking, so I decided to kind of do a reset and throw a wash over it, and for that I used a fairly liberal wash of Seraphim Sepia. Once the wash was dry, I went in with a thinned down Bugman's Glow and pretty much went over the same areas I did with the Cadian Fleshtone, and with the wash darkening the recesses of the model, this made the Bugman's Glow actually become a slight highlight to the skin rather than the base coat. At this point, I was much happier with the shadow color, so I went back in and highlighted with Cadian Fleshtone, making sure to highlight over the Bugman's Glow, but not completely cover it up. Finally, I went in with a layer of Kislev Flesh and just highlighted around the face, the fingers, anywhere I want the light to really make it pop. Alright, with the skin complete, I moved on to the clothing, and to start that off, I used a mix of 1:1 Rhinox Hide and Deathworld Forest. Once I finished the clothing, I decided to use the Rhinox Hide that was still on my palette and knock out the pants. Afterwards, I went in with Thinned Down Deathworld Forest and started highlighting the clothes with that. For the final highlight, I mixed a little bit of Elysian Green into the Deathworld Forest, about 1:1, and knocked out the last highlight. Okay, with the little tunic done, I decided to start on the hair, and for that I started with a layer of Screamer Pink. At this point, it dawned on me that the majority of her clothing were the same color as her tunic, so I went back and knocked out the remainder of the cloth areas using the same colors as stated previously. After that was fixed, I started to work on the yellow trim and started setting it up with a layer of Administratum Grey all over the areas that I wanted to eventually be yellow. Now, I was originally going to do this with a metallic gold color, but it didn't really make sense to me to do that seeing as how our armor is mostly leather, so I decided against it. Once that layer was finished, I went in with a 1-to-1 mix of Yriel Yellow and Administratum Grey and covered the entire area that I covered with the Grey initially. Finally, I used pure Yriel Yellow and colored the area that would be the highlights for the trim. After that, I decided to start on the hair again, and for that I mixed a little bit of Khorne Red into the Screamer Pink and just started picking out the individual pieces of the hair. Next, I started on all the belts and straps of the model, and to start off with I used a layer of Mournfang Brown. all that done, I moved on to Zandri Dust and started doing the bow. In hindsight, doing the bow right now was a bit of a mistake. I should have waited until I finished the cloak, which you'll see later because I kept nicking it with the colors I was painting on the cloak. With that done, I took a layer of Agrax Earthshade and covered all over the belts and the bow itself, and on the tips of the bow I mixed in a little bit of Carroburg Crimson into it and just dabbed it over the areas where I wanted it to be a little bit more red than brown. When that was dry, I went back in and highlighted it back up with just the pure Zandri Dust. After that was done, I went in with a layer of Rhinox Hide and started doing all of the darker leather areas, like the quiver and the actual shafts of the arrows themselves. Another thing worth mentioning is that I also took the basic green color that we did with all the fabric and continued down the length of the leg to make the shoes and boots that same color as well. And I also coated the fur of the cape with a layer of Skavenflight Dinge, although I forgot to film that part, so apologies for that. I also took that Rhinox Hide from doing the quiver and did all of the metallic areas around the knee and the ankles on the shoes, just to get that ready to do the metallic effects later. Once the Rhinox Hide was done, I took Balthasar Gold and coated all the areas that I just coated with the Rhinox Hide. After giving that metallic paint a good amount of time to dry and making sure it was completely dry, I started doing washes. First off, I used a layer of Nuln Oil over the fur on the cloak, and then I used a fairly liberal amount of Agrax Earthshade over the metallics that we just painted. Alright, with everything else finished, it was time to move on to the cape, and for this I'm just going to explain all the colors I used to do it all at once, and the technique and everything is very similar to how I did the purple cloak on the Dark Knight. And to start off, I base coated the whole thing with a layer of Caliban Green, followed by a 1-to-1 mix of Caliban Green and Warpstone Glow. Then I used a layer of pure Warpstone Glow, and then finished it off by mixing together a 1-to-1 mix of Warpstone Glow and Straken Green. Alright, and that is how to paint the Outcast from Darklight, Momento, Mori. If you guys have any comments or concerns, criticism, what have you, feel free to leave a comment down below or get in touch with me on my Facebook, which is linked in the description. I hope you guys have a great day, and I will see you next time when we paint the Exorcist.